Testing. Hello. Hi, everyone. Hello. Yes, your silence was a message to start, even though we were still running around tweaking things. Welcome to ICALA and to tonight's discussion, A Closer Look, Recent Identity and Race-Based Exhibitions in Los Angeles. My name is Aska Hisa, Director of Learning and Engagement, and this is our final public program during the last week of the exhibition Scratching at the Moon, an exhibition co-curated by Anna Sue Hoy and Anne Elgood that focuses on 13 intergenerational diasporic Asian American artists with deep ties to Los Angeles, whose practices are diverse and contributive to research, activism, pedagogy, and community. Scratching at the Moon opened on February 10th, Lunar New Year, and we decided to extend decided to extend it by 2 months beyond its initial May closing date. The show closes this Sunday, July 28th, after a lengthier run with many programs, reviews, and visitorship. Our institution has since decided to shift to 2 exhibitions per year instead of 3. And we believe that this generosity of time will allow programs to be developed in response to internal and external reflections on the shows. Hence the title, A Closer Look. A Closer Look is our new programmatic venture to examine curatorial work, its responsibilities around and approaches to the revelation of untold stories, the provocation of dialogue, and the celebration of human achievement. We're very excited about this evening's A Closer Look group of speakers who have been involved with significant identity and race-based exhibitions around this town in the last 6 months at museums and galleries. This promises to be a rich conversation on curatorial practices, the ambitions and challenges around these projects, and what this work means for future exhibitions. We've provided elaborate bios in the programs on your seats, but let me say the names of who we have here on the panel. Charles Gaines, artist and co-curator, Retro Action Part 2, Hauser and Wirth, was on view February 27th to May 5th, 2024. There's Charles on the end. Dr. Jenny Lin, curator of Another Beautiful Country at USC's Pacific Asia Museum, which was on view from January 26th to April 24th, 2024. Representing the group of 12 artists who collectively curated At the Edge of the Sun at Jeffrey Deitch Gallery are Guadalupe Rosales and Shizu Saldamando. The other artist curators are Diana Yesenia Alvarado, Michael Alvarez, Mario Ayala, Carla Ekaterina Canseco, Rafa Esparza, Alfonso Gonzalez Jr., Ozzy Juarez, Maria Maella, Jaime Munoz, and Gabriela Ruiz. If artists from that show are here, the co-curators, would you please raise your hands? Hi. Yeah. Okay, and that show was on view from February 24th to June 4th, 2024. Representing the curatorial dynamic duo of Scratching at the Moon is ICALA's Good Works Executive Director and co-curator Anne Elgood. An artist and co-curator Anna Sue Hoy. Are you here, Anna? There's Anna. Okay. And then finally, our esteemed moderator is Darby English, art historian, the University of Chicago, Department of Visual Arts, and the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. And from 2019 to 2023, English was visiting professor at the UCLA School of Art. There are many ways to support ICALA, and coming to our exhibitions and programs is definitely the best. I will now hand this microphone to Darby English. Thank you, panelists, for your participation, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Aska, and thank you all for being here. Alberto, am I doing okay with the mic? Yeah, I drop my voice a lot, so if I drop the mic, you don't hear anything. I wanted just to say at the top of the thing that although this is a subject, I should say these are subjects that I have thought about for a long time and dedicated a good amount of teaching and writing work to. My job this evening, which I'm really excited to do as best I can, is to facilitate a conversation among these 5 practitioners first for about 45 minutes or an hour, and then among all of you and them and us in the time that we have remaining, which should be at least half an hour if we stick to the timing that we have committed to. I'm going to ask for signs when it's time to shut the group down and open the primary attendees group up. But I should say that in order to, what would the word even be? To begin to try and wrangle the very rangy and I think necessarily incoherent thinking that serious people, such as all of us gathered, bring to subjects like identity and race-based exhibitions and the curating thereof. In order to try and bring that under some amount of control before we begin, I asked on Sunday, Monday, a little too late, hopefully not too late, I asked everyone by email to get ready at the beginning of the program to say a little something. I asked for a minute or less because I know we'll all tune out if it turns into soapboxing. A minute or less on a sort of statement of position on the subjects at hand as you understand them, however you understand them. I would add an asterisk that I left out of my email, which is a minute or less that is not a restatement of the précis of the project that you are here representing, if that's okay. Just because people probably, if they haven't both seen and read about the shows, they'll know enough about where you're coming from curatorially to know what you're here to be about. So, and I don't have a statement, but I could make one under duress. Let me just say that. But I won't do it now. So I'm going to yield at this point and start facilitating rather than talking.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, if that's okay.
Hi, my name is Shizu. I have strong feelings about this idea of racially curated shows. I don't think this one necessarily is because it's one of the most diverse shows I've seen in terms of representation of different Asian American individuals. You have the whole gamut of identity in this show, but I think it's a kind of flattening statement to make. But anyways, I grew up in the Mission. I used to go to Galeria de la Raza. When I moved here for art school, I started working at Self-Help Graphics. And these spaces were always born out of being marginalized and not being put on in institutions. So there's always been a really strong community-based building within art that I've come from. It's been a community center, it's been a place of support, not only just for art, but for political activisms as well. So it just made sense, I think, that going forward and coming out of grad school, the place that I was put on, or I felt kind of like at home, was doing a lot of, I guess, culturally specific exhibitions. And that was a problem too, because I had come out of grad school and that's what I was getting put on. Like, I was really popular during Hispanic Heritage Month. And it's the only way I think my work would be put out there. I had certain professors, certainly not Charles did not tell me this, but someone told me that my work, being so figurative and doing portraits of brown people, my work would be, very well received at community centers, but probably not mainstream white supremacist arts institutions. So I should maybe become more conceptual. And I had to strategize. And this was back in the 2000s, where a lot of artists of color were really trying to strategize their work to be more in dialogue with more conceptually based practices that were not necessarily overtly culturally specific. And I respect that strategy too in survival and how people have done that. But I feel like for At the Edge of the Sun, for a lot of other exhibitions that I've been a part of, Phantom Sightings perhaps, back in, I was in that one as well, so I've been in all these shows and I've heard all this sort of debate around them. I wouldn't necessarily call it race-based at all for any of these shows. It's about putting on a group of people. For At the Edge of the Sun, it was like about our friendships, our circles, or who we were influenced by. So in a way, I'm not sure if the language is off, and that's what we should be critiquing, is the way we describe these exhibitions. Maybe that's a question for us, the way language has flattened and marginalized people, and the way that is perpetrated within larger institutional contexts. But that's just something to think about, and I think it's been a minute.
Hi, everyone. I'm Guadalupe. And just to jump off, what you were sharing about the show and just like identity, something that I was thinking about in terms of At the Edge of the Sun, and also just, naming shows based on like identity, or for example, like brown artists or Latinx artists, it feels like it does also like flatten, what people come to see. But then, for example, at the end, wait, I forgot the name of the show. At the Edge of the Sun, something that happened was once the show was up, we were able to see the layers and the complexities, and also how different the work was from each other. And at the same time, we are also seeing how we all inspired each other at the same time. And also we're inspired by each other, but also, I guess the show was really focused on like Southern California or LA, that was like kind of like the jumping off ideas, but then the work looks so different from each other. And that's all I have to say.
No idea what that sound is.
I know.
Seems like I should, but I don't. There's a lot of ghosts in the building with this exhibition, so I'm gonna say that's what's going on. But can everyone hear me okay with the soundtrack? I'm Ann Elgood. I'm the director here at ICALA, and I'm speaking on behalf of the institution and as a co-curator, but also trying to speak with and for Anna, who's there we go, who really is the curator for Scratching at the Moon. And I think in terms of organizing an exhibition using identity or race or ethnicity as a kind of methodology, one thing that's important about this exhibition is that it is deeply personal for Anna, and that's really how it started. And in many ways, I think At the Edge of the Sun shares with Scratching at the Moon a deep commitment to putting forward community. And one of the things when Anna came to me, I think the context is so important, because this was 2021. We all know how 2020 went, not a great year. And she was, in many ways, developing this idea out of her work in response, as an activist, in response to the murder of George Floyd, in response to the increasing hate crimes against Asian Americans with the COVID pandemic. And a lot of the pain of that, but also the coalition building and the community building that also grew out of that moment. And I think it's important to understand that in that context, she felt this drive toward recognizing her own community, her own network, and the desire for more visibility for that community. When she came to me to talk about it, the question then became, okay, then why do this exhibition at this institution at this time? So I tried to sort of pull it back from that personal endeavor to more of an institutional question. And to me, the reasons that Anna was drawn to do the exhibition were completely relevant, but also what was that context, and what is the history of representation of Asian Americans specifically in museums in Los Angeles, which through our research and through the research of our catalog contributors became very evident it was pretty minimal and sorely lacking, which I think was even surprising to us. I mean, we knew that, but the degree to which that was true. The other thing that I want to say here is that one question I asked myself a lot in the process of this was, how would the exhibition maybe look and feel different than if we were putting forward an exhibition with the same structure 20 or 30 years ago? And when there were, many exhibitions here and elsewhere around identity, around politics of representation, I guess you could say. And I do think that that element of community is extremely important, that became the organizing principle in some way, and that to do a survey of 13 artists is a kind of experiment, in the sense that obviously 13 artists is not very many artists, and it proposes the possibility that there are many, many surveys that can be done, and it's not any kind of attempt to be comprehensive in its purview whatsoever. And certainly, as you go through the exhibition, you understand that there are many Asian countries not represented through this show. There's no attempt to, have an artist from every Asian country or be holistic or comprehensive in any way. And then maybe building on also what Lupe was saying, that you see the diversity of the practices here, both in every way, materially, conceptually, content-wise. And yet there is an examination throughout, as you go through it, of a kind of diasporic experience that is shared but manifests very differently and through very different kind of stories. So I could say a lot more, but I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. I also have long felt very uneasy about race-based exhibitions. Being mixed race myself and half Chinese, I grew up just thinking that labels were reductive and didn't fit me. And yet, during 2020, with the rise of the hateful rhetoric by former President Donald Trump and the blaming of Chinese people and Chinese Americans for the coronavirus, rising violence against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, I felt a real need to focus on this kind of group and this collective group, and especially of artists, and because I think that art gives us a way to share our cross-cultural experiences that is resistant to the rhetoric and the sensationalist news stories, and it gives us a way of simply relating to one another on a personal level at its most poignant for me. So the exhibition that I curated at the USC Pacific Asia Museum, Another Beautiful Country, Moving Images by Chinese American Artists, did take a relatively specific cultural framework that is Chinese American artists. All of the artists in the exhibition identified in some way, however mixedly, as Chinese American. But at the same time, I also wanted to upset that label. For example, America. Not all of the artists were United States citizens or were born in the United States. Perhaps they were born elsewhere, Hong Kong, but also elsewhere in the Americas, Canada, Trinidad and Tobago. Also, I wanted to show the great diversity of Chinese American artists. I had a multi-generational group of 10 artists present works, all of them related to issues of Chinese American identity and cultural diaspora, but in very diverse ways in terms of media and also in terms of representation. And finally, I wanted to emphasize, and I think all of these exhibitions seem to share this, relationality and relations, be they friendship, kinship, familial relations, intimate relations, love relations, and how these can help us to transcend dangerous nationalist borders and identifications. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charles Gaines, and I curated a couple of shows that you might say, well, certainly focused on the issue of race, not so much about revealing certain practices that one would find among the group of artists that are of color, as much as was about proposing a criticism about what marginalizes and, you know, in fact, what is the reason these artists have to be brought together, what caused this in the first place. And of course, you know, it's because that we've been going through years of trying to unpack a colonial rule that is the decolonizing project. And the largest way of looking at it is that there's a decolonizing project being undertaken every time we put together an exhibition like this, and which makes it necessary. But then, way back when I was doing theater of refusal, I realized that the idea that shows that are called race-based or cultural-based, I realized that the notion that these are unique kind of and very specific shows that are on the margins was pretty ridiculous because I went to art school and I studied art history, and I studied the entire history of Western art, which was the study of race and ethnic-based art. That, you know, I mean, North African art, then I studied English art, then I studied French art, then I studied German art. I mean, those people gave you the impression that you're not studying race or culturally or ethnically based art. What you're talking about are universal practices. But it wasn't. It was just everybody was European that I was studying in art history, and all of them, the art was dealing about their cultures. So suddenly, when the opportunity in this decolonization project was undertaken to make the point that there should be space for artists of color, then of course it was easy to call that sort of special race-based, you know, like Jesus said that, you know, that she should make community center, put her paintings in the community center. You know, I mean, all she had to do was make her figures white, and then they wouldn't have said that, right? So the idea is that, and I agree with her, and I agree with the general principle that the whole thing is a consequence of a tremendous myth. It's necessary because we're in a decolonization project where we have to get people to understand that what artists of color are doing is as normal as any other artist is doing in their work and the variety of strategies and practices and critiques that they undertake.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I don't know why I agreed to moderate a panel about a discussion like that in the year 2024 and the week after whatever the fuck happened on Sunday to the electoral politics of this nation. But I must like a challenge. My job as a moderator is to pull. I'm going to try to pull some things out of what I'm hearing and hope that the pulling is sufficiently provocative to make you all keep talking. The first couple things, okay, at least two things struck me hard in the course of listening to your 1-minute position statements. The first is the notion stated twice in importantly different, but I think ultimately consonant ways, is that words will inevitably flatten what attentive people come to see as expansive when they actually enter a show. Like you both said it differently. The words we use are the words we use. They're categorical because there's a certain kind of coherent sense that we need to make in order to get a message across that gets people in the door, that gets people to agree to participate, whatever, get the funding we need, whatever. We need to make a certain kind of sense in order to make an appeal that will attract the kind of attention that we need to stay alive as a community of makers with propositions. We do that in a hope, and I think it's an increasingly desperate hope, that people will, when they arrive on a scene full of art, forget the words and have an experience that may actually ultimately bring the words back in a deconstructed or dissolved, or at least reconstructed and reconsidered form, so that an experience will occur that throws you back on the schemes that you looked towards the experience through and makes you more intelligent about both in the process. There's a desperate hope that the words that bring people in the door and that incite a certain kind of critical response ultimately won't be used that the work won't be held accountable to the discourse that's offered up, which is a way of expressing a kind of faith that art can break through language, that it just breaks language, even when it's made of language. Art made of language can break language. There are lots of examples, some of which have been flashing on the wall behind us as we've been talking. So that hope, however it might be shorthanded, is one that I feel I am hearing. I feel like I'm feeling it expressed again and again here. The other thing that I've heard in a couple different ways is to do with a paradox that the identity-based methodology brings with it, no matter where it goes, which is the paradox of the way in which it, at the very same time, allows a particular kind of focus, like it allows a curator and an audience to, again, to have a fairly coherent sense of where they are, what they're looking at, where it's come from, what rubric it's been brought under in order to be presented in a legible enough way. Categories like these operate helpfully as focuses or focusing elements, and they also, with equal force and every bit as often, operate unhelpfully as constraints. Like in the way that, like, somehow the Frenchness of French art doesn't inhibit French art's movement through history. It hasn't slowed its travel along the telos at all. But the blackness of black art has, in my argument, over a number of pages, inhibited the movement of black artists along the telos. It has slowed their paths through history. It's diverted them, it's shut them down, it's deposited them in places where they don't belong, it's taken them away from contexts in which they do belong, both historical and material. So these categories, they do really bad work and they do really good work. And I don't think, for me anyway, I've stopped being categorical about whether they're good or bad because I don't know until I see how they've been brought to bear. I just don't know. I have to be agnostic. I find now that I have to be agnostic because I just don't know until I'm in the situation how category and contents or a framework and interior are actually being related. I also don't know what kind of mood I'm in. Like, am I in a really lively and intelligent mood to parse the relationships in a show and how they've been constructed and how they might have been done otherwise, or am I feeling lazy? Am I feeling like an outsider who needs to be educated? The closer I feel to the identities on show, the more likely I am to come in that first attitude, which is it's okay. Someone has to pick it up. Oh, did it just roll away? I think that's a sign. That was meant to be provocative. That was meant to be provocative. I'm done speaking now. For now.
I think maybe, do you find that the shows that you think are really well done maybe are curated, like artist curated, or like, because I feel that is a big deal when artists curate shows and when you have people having control of their own context and their own voice.
I'm laughing because I didn't think we'd get there that fast. This fast, but I do think that there. I think it's important to say this carefully. I think that artists, curators, and curators are different curators. I think the differences, again, are not, they're not something that I am comfortable generalizing about in advance of a specific constellation of stuff and statement. But I do think that you get a different product. You just get a different product. You get a different voice. You have a way of association that works when people have been associated by an external agent who has reached in and organized things into a shape, right?
Well, I was going to say, because I only like listening to autobiographies read by the person who wrote it, the books.
Only.
Yeah,
Very
like I
categorical.
don't like hearing fictions, and I'm not into it because I just critique the prejudices of the author rather than hearing it from a perspective. Maybe that's a similar.
I hear a relation there. Yeah, I mean, but I also don't think it's useful to set up a thing where we have we have to have a different conversation when we're talking about a curator, an artist curated exhibition versus a curator curated exhibition, and especially since in this case we have the host institution is exemplifying what happens when both kinds of people participate in the making of the show. Anna's not here, but she's here. She's here. Is she wired? Are you wired? Are you going to speak? You've gone from row 6 to row 3, I noticed. There are only 3 rows between where you are and where we are. Come on down. But I mean, it seems to me important to recognize that there is something that the feel even is different. It's not just about abstract characteristics of the result. The feel is different. It also happened at Deitch. Like the artist curated exhibition happened at Deitch, which gave it another, which puts another ingredient into the cake, right? I noticed in the rhetoric of the exhibition, there's a pretty heavy stress on, on the nod to personal contexts and the importance of things happening, both associations and aesthetic practices happening away from mainstream sites. But then we're at Deitch. So that's something that had to be negotiated as well. It's a useful, to me, it's a very provocative tension, but it's a tension.
Do you want to talk about it?
Anybody have thoughts?
Yeah. I was just, I agree. I did find it very notable that, aside from myself and Anne, but she's the co-curator with Anna, these are all artist-curated exhibitions. And I think that does allow for a particular, as my esteemed colleague Amelia Jones, for example, knows, a fierce feminist who has done her share of identity-oriented exhibitions, fantastic ones. Art history as a field and art historians are very conservative, and we are taught, not only to marginalize non-Western European or non-European art, but also we're asked in a supposedly liberal conceptual frame to kill the author, right? The death of the author. And that comes historically right at a time when female voices, people of color, artists of color are rising up. And why is it that we all of a sudden can't talk about biography and the artist's background and who their family members are, where they came from, and why can't that be present in the work, and then it gets relegated to a community center, right? So I think there's a certain freedom maybe based on, for the artists, in terms of what you feel you can include and how you can include it, that maybe is liberating, at least from the old school curatorial mode. Yeah.
I can go on for days, but so I always get asked how my biography informs the work, being Japanese and Mexican. I always get like, well, what part is more this and what part is more that? And I just say that's a perfectly valid question, right? I think that's great, but I feel like it just needs to be dolled out to every single artist's in their own way. Like I feel like a minimalism show should be about like, you know, white male privilege in the 60s in the military industrial complex being intrinsic with that. And it is just not dolled out because whiteness is seen, right, as this like invisible thing, and these shows are kind of like decentering that, and that's why they become sort of like critiqued in a very critical way, right? And it's just I would say a strategy to try to decenter, like Charles was talking about, pretty like basically, you know, that's decentering what we terms of art, or who can be a whole person, who can exist as a whole. And even the term identity politics, or like art about identity, every single piece of art is about identity. Like there's nothing that's immune to that. It's about identity. It's just the way we doll it out is with people of color, that's because they're different. Oh no, we can't figure out who we are because we're not white. Oh my God, what are we doing? We're in this diasporic like relationship, and that's ridiculous. So yeah, I think like for our show, like, yeah, it was at Deitch, and that was like pretty amazing because I had never like, you know, like I was like, oh my God, I've been around and I'm going to show at Deitch. This is crazy, right? Okay, let's go. But yeah, there was like all these different things that we were really conscious of and very sensitive to in curating and trying to be very sensitive to that context. Where there's certain things we did behind the scenes. Go ahead.
I also wanted to mention about that show that one thing that really stood out to me was that we had this opportunity to like talk about our work the way we wanted to talk about it, and it was also, you know, a way to kind of like represent ourselves the way we wanted to be represented, but also collectively we were making all these decisions together. And also, you know, if we didn't agree with something, we talked about it, and we even created like a group text just to like stay in dialogue. So that was really special because I think also a lot of us, for the most part, haven't had that opportunity to ask for what we need and also shape a show together. But I was also thinking about this experience that I had actually in Mexico City. It was a two-person show with my friend Rafa Esparza, who's here. And it was a two-person show, and there was a tour of people coming. It was like during Freeze. And it was a group from Denver. And one of the guys, a visitor said to me, like, so does your work mean that you're like glorifying gangs? And nothing in the show was about gangs. I didn't have a portrait of a cholo and nothing. It was like all these like abstract photographs and sculptures, and I just had to like question that, you know, like what makes you say that, you know, is it the work or is it me? And we went back and forth, and then he's like, well, it didn't go anywhere with that conversation, but he literally got really aggressive to answer that, you know, and I was like, well, what makes you ask that question? And he couldn't answer it.
Couldn't answer.
No, so I don't know if he was profiling me or my work, and that's the question that I have, you know, like what is it? Because it was nowhere in text, so it's like I guess the question is it the text when we write about our work, or is it like our bodies? What is it?
In that moment, your body was a text. Like you became so many signs for reading, right?
Yeah, exactly. I became that, you know, exactly, or. Yeah, you know, and then I start going like thinking about who I am. It's like, is it me? Is it? I mean, I also have I run a project. It's all like focused on alley based or even like Latinx, you know, archives. So I was like thinking about that. Like, is it that? But it's like I don't know if he knows that work, you know, because it's like not even in the show in many ways. You know, it's really vague. It's almost like this ghost in the show, but it's not about that. So.
We haven't heard as much from Anne and Charles yet on this. Would you guys like to jump in? I don't want to no one's under any pressure.
Well, a couple things came up for me. One is that, I mean, I guess Anna and I are the example here of artist and curator working together, and I'm not an art historian. So maybe I'm somewhere weirdly in the middle in terms of my indoctrination into what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do. But I do feel in my own practice and in a lot of maybe exhibitions where I know enough about the process to know this is perhaps part of it, that I'm a big proponent of intuition at the start of a project and really following just a particular kind of impulse. And I think then you start to put the shape and maybe the art historical evaluation or the curatorial argument within that, but to trust those instincts, to trust those desires, which is often what they are, in terms of a particular investigation or seeing certain artists together. And I think that somehow that was part of Anna and my process, because again, I think that she was so intuitively compelled and also, very confident in a way around this idea. And then in trusting that and in trusting her, we could move into a space of, okay, well, what are the contours of this that need to get unpacked from a larger context? And I love working like that. And it's, again, really her idea, and I want to give her full ownership of that. But being able to support that as a curator and as an institution, that's, I think, incredibly valuable. So, we're an institution that works with a lot of guest curators, and among the many guest curators that we work with, there's a steady beat of artists. And I do think that museums gain great value and kind of critical experience by inviting artists to curate. And that doesn't mean all those shows are good. Back to maybe what Darby was saying. Any methodology we pick, whether it's identity-based or medium-based, we've all seen terrible shows about painting, right? Doing a painting show doesn't make it a good show. There's good painting shows and there's terrible painting shows. And there's good identity-based shows and there's terrible ones. And so I think part of what we're trying to maybe look at tonight together is what does make a show that shares this methodology around identity have a kind of resonance or impact or push questions. I'll say one last thing, and maybe we can come back to this, but part of our desire to do the panel tonight was both the awareness that there were all these shows that were happening kind of at once, which struck me as really interesting, and also because there were a couple of reviews of Scratching at the Moon that posed the very question, why do we need these shows still? And do we? And it felt like, one thing that I think is important there, that those questions are valid, most certainly, but also that Charles's Theater of Refusal from 1992, 93? 93. The year of the Whitney Biennial, which we can get into if we want to go there, was very much a critique of the inability of the critics to contend with the work of artists of color, and how reactionary and how completely off the point so much of the criticism was. I mean, if you go back and read the reviews of the Whitney Biennial from '93, they're actually, with distance, almost funny. They're so hysterical in their assessment of, the fall of contemporary art, apparently. And so maybe, Charles, now or later, you could speak to how Theater of Refusal was really, taking up that very problematic situation in which so many artists of color's work just was not able to be evaluated in, I think, fair and meaningful ways by the critics of the time.
At that time, the art world is very different than it is now. I'm not saying the art world today isn't racist, because how marginalizing practices operate today is simply different than the way they operated then. For example, I think that that critics and curators and writers and maybe a lot of artists tend to float to a particular idea of what kind of work black artists should be doing, today, and I think the market plays a big role in how this operates, so that the artists of color who make work that are focused on identity get less attention from critics and curators than artists who do. And a lot of artists think that's another kind of stereotyping. Right? So the language of stereotyping, and it really has little to do with what a good painting or good work of art or a bad work of art is. I mean, because you can be a conceptual artist and make really crappy work, and you be a figurative painter and make really beautiful work. But it's about the how that work is, what's being focused on at a time. And so in my day, that if there's any recognition of identity or even if the work has nothing to do with it, if you're black or Latino or whatever, and you're making work, then all the writers try to write about that work in terms of your identity, and use that discovery of a language identity that they themselves have created as a reason to dismiss the work. And today, I think that it's same kind of strategy of organizing and shaping the work of artists of color is going on, but it's a kind of an attempt at advancing the work. But in the effort of doing that, it begins to stereotype the work, which is another kind of marginalizing. I mean, I just want to go back to the fact that I think that dealing with shows that have an interest in focusing on culture, and I won't use the word identity, but focusing on certain experiences that one finds lacking in representation. I think those shows are quite necessary, and they're still necessary. And as I said before, I think they're necessary because the art world that we live in is still racist. And so it isn't about specifically saying that, well, I'm being excluded because I'm talking about black issues. It's still about I find myself still in a very highly carved space and in terms of my own experiences, and so it's necessary one way or another, however I want to address those experiences, as one way or another that has to find itself into the work. And I take that it's because of the continued existence of racism, which takes me back to the idea that shows like this are part of a decolonizing practice or project, that it's just trying to find a space where the subject of blackness, gayness, or whatever, are just normal subjects, like the Russians' character Raskolnikov. That wasn't an identity. They didn't see it as an identity protagonist. It was simply a very screwed up human being, having very fucked up ideas. And so, like, if you talk about the problems of an individual who is a person of color, there's no reason not to address that as part of a universalizing language of the in-depth investigation of subjectivity. But it's not going on yet. So until it goes on, these shows become, I think, quite necessary. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of, that you brought up, Darby, and I might have gotten it wrong, but the idea of identity-focused works, tending to be produce uninteresting shows or narrow, producing a narrow perspective of the subject, and so if that's what you're saying, yeah. So I knew I got it wrong, But I'm going to continue anyway,
Yeah,
and then
please.
you can.
Yeah.
But the issue that I was going to say is that more than ever, artists that was considered marginalized one way or another, or artists that come so doing some of the most extraordinary work I've ever seen in my whole life as an artist, and I've been an artist for 250 years, and
Is that all?
is that, yeah, so the work is quite extraordinary and complex, and as has being said here, that the diversity of practices is pretty extraordinary. It's not focused on. There is an effort by the galleries and curators to narrow the diversity of this practice. And so you see some of it coming forward more than others because of that market interest.
Yeah.
But the work I think that's going on today is just extraordinary.
Yeah, what I want to, I do want to make clear what I meant, because I'm sure I mangled it on the way out of my brain. What I was trying to say was that the identity rubric can and is very often used, I might think most helpfully, as a means of focusing attention on groups and groupings of individual practices. I think that's a salutary aspect or feature or use of the rubric. I think what has always given me a lot of anxiety is that always very salutary focalizing way of putting the rubric to use has to coexist with ways of putting the rubric to use which are designed to confine, contain, limit, and encroach on, if not altogether deny, artistic freedom and aesthetic range, and to shut down open and curiosity and debate about art. Like, oh, it's a black show because we need to keep the blacks where we have the blacks, because the sooner we let them sprawl, and so with every other group that ever needed containing. So if you're gonna meet the personal need that Anna had to see a series of connections historicized and visualized and turned into a felt environment within an institutional context, you're going to have to negotiate both sides of that coin. What's necessary about finally, after God knows how actually long, creating a context for Asian American artists in LA to be seen and shown on their own terms in an LA contemporary institution within the by using the only tools currently available to an institution of art, which are inevitably going to, at some place you have to draw a perimeter, and perimeters are fraught. They're fraught things, They're fraught from inside, they're fraught from outside. We like to figure perimeters with dotted lines as if they are always permeable from all directions, but we know better than that about perimeters. Usually the wire is barbed, and so that's what I meant. I meant, like, it's. I mean, I wrote a dissertation about how nice it would be to stop confining black artists to one tiny section of the Dewey Decimal System by writing a dissertation only about black artists. I had to figure the bind to deal with the bind. I had no choice. I didn't think I'm not that imaginative. I did what I could think of at the time. And I continue to work largely in that area by focusing my attention on black artists with the goal of moving them to a better, more open place in a history that I will not be a part of. I write for the future. I have no hope of seeing anything borne out, anything that I want borne out in my lifetime. It's playing with the difference, So that's, I want to clear both to you and to everyone here where I was coming from, because I know how that probably sounded. It's more about how I think we have, I had to stop being categorical about theme shows and groupings and so forth, because I think it's all about how they're being done and what kind of socio-historical context the grouping is actually happening in. If there's never been a group of this kind before, people have a legitimate reason to believe that the people in the group don't exist. I would say that part of the reason this work strikes you as so extraordinary is because it's so extra to your ordinary as a 250-year-old art person. Like, you can only ask, like, where the fuck has this been? Like, where has this been my whole life? Like, I don't want to do anything but this for the rest of the time I have, because I've had enough of Angla, I've seen enough. I could go on with names we all know better, but you know, I've had enough. I have that shit memorized. Let's have something new. You know, it's so that's what I have to say about that. I hope that was clear.
We have 10 minutes. Is that for questions?
Question? Yes. Oh, 10 minutes before questions, or is there 10 minutes for questions? Before. Okay. Hey, could I say something by way of? No.
Go.
No, I won't. I won't. That was filler. I was gonna say filler.
Well, I just had a couple thoughts. One, and I'm just going to throw these out there and not go on, because we're down to 10 minutes. One is that the market becomes a very narrowing apparatus. Yeah. And so, and I think you just touched on this, Darby, and I think you were getting at it as well, Charles, which is, you know, the market only shows us certain things, and there's so much else going on in contemporary art. And also, I'm very aware in our conversation of this double-sided imperative. One is institutional, art historical, structural, political, I would say. The imperative to do shows like this do have a kind of purpose because of the racism that still exists, because of the sexism that still exists, etc. But also equally as important is the fact that these shows are being done by the people of color for themselves and for each other. And Anna has said that, and I think in your introduction maybe to the book, Anna, you said something really beautiful about, I wanted to create visibility for these artists, for the world, for the community, for, you know, all of you, but I also wanted to do it for us. And I think you see that clearly in your show, and Charles, you too, and you too, Jen. I mean, across the board here, and I think that's just an important part of these exhibitions.
I want to talk a little bit more about the 90s. But, I mean, I don't know if that can be on the Q&A, but so the critical reception of, I think, all of these exhibitions has been overall very positive and starkly in contrast to the critiques of the 1993 Whitney Biennial and other exhibitions of that kind. And yeah, why is everything okay now? Is that what that means? Because it doesn't feel like everything's fine, and you know or is it just, yeah? I don't know. Tell me.
No, everything is not fine. You know, I mean but all I'm saying is you got to pay attention to the new forms that marginalized behavior take. Mm-hmm. You know, or you know because you know. In other words, the increase in the visibility of artists of color, you know, it's like Obama becoming president. Oh, racism is over now, you know. But it's showing up in different ways. You just have to be aware of it. So it's the project is still necessary. Mm-hmm.
Question.
Well, could I ask you too to say a little bit more about the friendship circle that that the group in your group show was born out of? 'Cause I couldn't stop thinking. I put some notes together, and they were largely drawn from things I found in the PRs and thought and feelings that I had as I read the PRs for each of these shows, and the one that has proven most resonant is like, why aren't there more groups, like friend group shows? Like the group show, we know the group show, we know that rubric by heart, and it's usually as I said earlier, as was said by others earlier, it's usually formed, these are groups that are formed from outside, someone associating, probably free associating with parties and objects about which they know intellectual things, maybe some art historical facts, but not a lot about the people that they constitute into a group through their curatorial work. And less often that I'm aware of, or less often that is acknowledged up front, constituted from like groups constituted by the members of the groups on their own.
Do anyone that was in the show want to talk, like Jaime or Gabriela?
Oh yeah, we actually wanted to do that too and put them on the spot.
Do you want to talk about being friends?
Here, I'm going to throw this. Raise your hand.
If you're in Phantom Sight, or not at the edge of the sun.
Expensive? Can I throw it?
No, Jaime, Gabby, you don't want to talk about being our friend?
I'm not your friend.
Michael, do you want to talk about being our friend?
I'm not your friend.
Michael, yeah.
Michael Alvarez.
Can you introduce Michael?
Oh, yeah. This is
Thank you. Hi,
Michael
Esther.
Alvarez.
Hi, everybody.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Michael Alvarez. I'm a part of the At the Edge of the Sun group show. I guess I forgot what I was just thinking, but I mean, I think it's just a very natural thing. Just being able to work with people. I'm just even thinking about times like, you know, hanging out. Even like Ozzy, like we see our work like projected on the screen and we're like giving each other daps. It's just like it's a natural thing. And I see other friends here that, you know, we've been friends for, you know, almost 20 years. Shout out my homegirl Janine. Or colleagues of mine. Shout out my homie Jose, who I see in the crowd too. So there's just like circles and groups of friends and connections. And I think we all have that. And for At the Edge of the Sun, I feel very fortunate to be a part of it. And I think kind of having things where the connections they exist outside of, or maybe even deeper than just what like beyond the art world context, even like talking to Shizu about like, you know, how's your son, how's your family, or like even, you know, talking to Guadalupe, to talk about very common things, I think, but also to have these other connections too, or even have like a multi-layered art world connection feels very special, and it feels like more of a human experience rather than something that's kind of clinical or like institutional and like, I mean, not to say institutional is bad, but maybe the sterile aspect that it can be sometimes. Or maybe even the misunderstood aspect, because I think a lot of us maybe have the experience of maybe being a part of something or being invited to something, and even though, like everyone had mentioned, identity is, whether we like it or not, a component to what we do, but then kind of like having that identity totally distorted and like misrepresented. I know I've experienced that, you know, quite a lot. So to be around people where we understand each other, I think is a special thing. So I hope that answered that, and thank you.
Yeah, can I interject something too that I wanted to jump off? Thank you for that awesome answer. I think also going back to community center, as Chicano artists and working at Self-Help Graphics, seeing the different waves of fads in the art world, I think a lot of us saw that and saw how artists were used and then just like discarded, like this identity politics moniker became like this dirty word. And so artists navigating grad schools, navigating their art world, seeing each other in institutions and creating space for each other and support. And we did a show outside of an institution in Alfonso's backyard called LA Fonts, and we were trying to create exhibition spaces, art spaces that existed outside of the institution specifically, so we weren't reliant on institutional approval and accolades, and we understood the need to cultivate a strong supportive community. And I think going forward in this country with what's happening, we all need to be community in support with each other, first and foremost, because we know institutions will not have our backs. And so I think that that's the impetus for a lot of what our friend group has been a part of, is realizing that, seeing that throughout history, not wanting to reify these sort of historical traumas of other artists of color that we've seen, and wanting to create alternative methods where our whole art identity is not wrapped up in the institution whatsoever, and holding space for each other, having spaces outside of that as well, community spaces, dinner spaces, just checking in and making sure that the what is the word? The context is a little less narrow because we've seen what happens and what has happened historically with that. Academia is one thing, but not to put all your eggs in one basket, basically.
There's something that makes me think of that I remember now, again, from a conversation with Anne about the world of Anna's that the show here comes out of, and that's a world of pedagogical connections. And like you mentioned school, I thought when you mentioned grad school of the groupings of artists that often come together in the exhibition spaces within the studio buildings. As I understand them, those shows are usually groups of friends deciding to show at the same time in the same space together. They differ in structure, in spirit, and usually in success from the shows made when groups of graduating MFAs or BFAs get divided into exhibition groups by the faculty or whomever. It's just a different kind of environment because it comes out of a different kind of relationship and support and conversation. It is an alternative space. It is not brick and mortar in the way that the alternative space of art historical lore tends most often to be, even when it's transient, but it is an alternative space about which I think we could stand to be a lot more curious, in which we could stand to be a lot more invested, and pay a lot more attention. That's one thing. The other thing I want to say about your thing, the friend group show, is that I tend to come to group shows, as will be clear by now to everyone, with a fair amount of, before the fact, I'm a little bit, what's this going to be? And that, what I say now is that comes from a deep concern for the art. Like I'm wondering, usually in a kind of worried attitude, like how is that for the art, you know? That worry is a lower frequency worry when it's a group, when it's what you all have done, when it's what Michael describes and shouting out people in the different, I don't have the same level of concern, like what was the curating of this exhibition like for the art, you know? Maybe I do, but it's just very different. It's a lower frequency, you know? It seems to be something, and I don't know what I'm saying, but I said it and there it is.
A Q&A.
Oh yeah, Q&A. We'll bring a mic to you as soon as we see your hand. Should I help? Do you want help? No. Cool.
Just trying to get rid of that mic.
Yeah, I really am. Do you guys need this one?
Oh, yeah, but we're not gonna
Good job.
You're like, no.
On the front.
I have like 19 questions, so I'll maybe start with where we were, just to continue this line of thinking about where things get done in community centers and et cetera, because all of this is in ecology, right? And sort of pointing out where these shows exist. But one thing that hasn't come up, probably because it's too complicated and scary and unmanageable, is where the art market is in all of this, of course, and the sort of voracious global capitalistic system that operates entirely on perceived scarcity to control markets and et cetera. But there's nothing that a gallery likes more than like an attic full of art by an artist that was quote unquote lost to time or undiscovered it, or artists who have been very incorrectly marginalized. Trends of like old ladies getting big shows, et cetera. And if anybody on the panel wants to sort of share anything on that, it's sort of just interesting to me. Maybe, full disclosure, I was an institutional curator for a long time, and now I work freelance, but just thinking too about, we're talking a lot about institutions, but we're not talking about the way that the markets talking about sides of coins, both fail and prop up all kinds of careers, and will leave them by the wayside in a second if sales drop off, et cetera. I'll stop.
Yeah, That's why we did our support networks, diversify your practice. I tattoo, I teach. I've never relied on sales, ever, because of everything that I've seen. So I would hope that's why we try to be in community and support one another, because, it's capitalism is evil, so.
Well, let me say one more thing too, because I totally agree that I don't think most artists actually do support themselves or are able to on sales. But like, I guess the bigger query or thing to even just throw out there is, how is the market actually changing a lot of these discussions about identity, and who is getting attention and who's not, and how those, question, I don't know, just comments, I suppose, for the group.
I mean, I don't know if it's the market. I would say the recent activism has really changed. We've called, people are being called to task in terms of how can you have institutions with no people of color on the board, no administration. It's one thing to show the artist, but if your administration doesn't reflect that too, that's problematic. And I believe that a lot of arts institutions are trying to rectify that by showing more artists of color. I don't believe the art market is necessarily reflective. Like, I certainly haven't sold more than, I've actually sold less. So I don't know if it reflects the market, but I definitely feel like there has been sort of like this, maybe if it's just not even concrete, but more metaphorical, about people trying to be more diverse with their administration and their boards and their, but it's, but I feel like that's because of activism, not because of market.
I think I've been around almost 250 years, but I was curating in the 90s, and I was curating of necessity through identity politics in a way that brought the wrath of the art critics, as they were. Some of them are still writing for the LA Times. I still feel a little bit scarred, although not really, because I've moved on. But I wanted to say something about it's kind of lurking or implicit in what a lot of you are saying about the political imperative that I think as activists or thinkers or artists or curators who care about the world, you get to a point where you see a group maligned that you identify with in one way or another. You may be at the center of it, or you may be an ally, and you feel compelled. And I think that's why Theater of Refusal was brilliant. I think it's why these shows that are kind of responding to the very specific moment of anti-Asian hate, that then you can feel when you go into them a kind of affirmation. And I just wanted to throw that out, that I think that's a huge part of why I think what you were saying, Darby, that you can't just say no, because in a way the reason that we have these categories is also the other side of the piece of that tension is the activist necessity, that you have to form a coalition, you have to take on the label in order to do something about it. So I just really appreciate all of these shows for that reason. And I also just wanted to say that as a non-artist, curator, academic type of person, I do not consider myself outside of artist communities. And greedily, that's like why I do what I do, because I get to hang out with artists. So I think ideally we're not in two separate communities, that we're part of the same worlds. And that, for me, is what made my shows, whatever other people think about them, incredibly affirmative for me, because I get to kind of actualize something in space and time that other people can experience that's a little different from writing a book that people may or may not read. So thank you all.
turn. Hello. Hi. My question is about how we think of media and the role of media in telling stories for us. Let's say that we were in a marginalized community and all of a sudden we're in the spotlight. I think the larger your audience gets, the less control you have of your own narrative. And I was wondering if you could talk about ways that, like, grander media, looking at stories in these exhibitions, may help or hurt your personal story, the meaning of your work, how they may flatten it, or how they might get it wrong.
I thought about that when I was asked to be in the Dite show, because I was like, oh, does that mean my work's going to be seen as like pop and commercial? But I feel like being like 46, I had a strong enough like career of not being in this context where it wouldn't hurt me. But yeah, so that's why I was like game to do it, because I was, oh, this should be a new experience, because I've done so many other types of exhibitions and spaces. So I felt like I've been around, so it wouldn't. But that's everybody. I kind of worry too a little bit about younger artists being put on so quickly and so visibly as being perhaps being, and that's, you know, being pigeonholed into a certain aesthetic or a certain idea. And not being given the freedom to expand on a practice or a career. So yeah, that's a really good concern and question. Yeah, freedom to like a pop star, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna late Pacavia. Very like pivoting, like, yeah, like how are you when you change or become more commercial, or if you, I don't know.
I feel like you should write a handbook for strategies of survival. I have all these.
Yeah, it's been a while.
takeaways,
Yeah, I have 3 jobs.
Yeah, but
I worked for Charles as an assistant too for a while.
Hi, Darby. I just wanted to ask a question. What about geography? So another show that was up in LA this year was Made in LA, and which seems to conjure this idea of like, what is an Angelino? Like, how does that affect art? We've been talking about the Whitney Museum of American Art. With the recent biennials, you've started to see some like anxiety or like fraying of America, that you have someone from Puerto Rico, someone from Canada, someone from Mexico. We have a show of Asian American artists, like Asian as an identity, Asia as a place that I can point to. We have Blackness as a category, as an identity, Africa as a place, like how these things relate to one another. So I was just thinking about that, and if any of you have, because, you know, we have articulated this show, or the ICA has articulated this show of around identity, but these are all also artists that are teachers, that are based in LA. Why is it that, you know, like, what is the hierarchy of these different categories?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, now I'm all for this, idea of rethinking what America is and decentering the United States as, right? Like, and as I mentioned, like, there was an artist in my exhibition, Richard Fung, who is ethnically Chinese, but his family, his mother was multi-generational Trinidadian, and he was born in Trinidad and then relocated to Canada. And I'm interested in these kinds of that define so many of us, I think, nowadays, these kinds of movements and lines of flights and immigrant parents or grandparents or whoever it is, right? And I think these are the stories that need to be told to expand our thinking about what America is, or who it's for. Right?
I found that I guess the show's based upon locations and so forth. I found that's a very interesting way to address this, my concern, or my issue of normalizing difference. Because some of the, one of the best shows and early shows that was really based on location was Oki Enwez's Biennale. And followed by several other biennales that did it in different ways, And because maybe it was an international show, it had that broad focus on difference. There's that, we are brightly concerned about the narrative of isolation and marginalization from discourse here in LA or in the United States. But 90% of the world has the same problem we're suffering from. And these large shows, the focus of these large shows bring that massive population and just diverse practices, but that massive population together. And I feel that, if this idea of location becomes more mainstream, it would go far in decentering the Eurocentric model for the exhibition of works.
I want to say to Brandon's question about place that it's, place and geography are two of the hardest subjects or objects, I don't know which, that I've ever tried to think about in a long time spent being forced by writers and art that I really want to think with and think deeply about to try. I felt routinely incompetent, unequipped, undereducated, poorly read, frustrated by them, and by their positings of place and geography, by their positings of the importance for them or their work or whatever, or me, of questions of place and geography. That was as routine for me until Donna DeSalvo's first installation of the new Whitney on Gansevoort Street. Not because of the installation, which, great, but not a world-changing installation of a collection that isn't a world-changing collection. It's idiosyncratic, is what it is. What she called it, which was America is hard to see. And I thought, yeah, you're fucking damn right it is. I've been trying to look at America for a big part of my entire life, long before I ever considered myself a student of anything. I've been trying to look at it, and it's just never there. And then other places. The first places that artists made me try to think about were the landscapes in Kara Walker's first big silhouette cycles. Like, where is this? Is a question she's always asking me to take as seriously as I can. Where is this happening? No where, but here is. But I have to write about it. Can you help me a little bit? No, I'm not here to help you with your writing problems. But Donna's thing, I sort of turn it into places are hard to see. Place is hard to see. Geography is hard to see. I don't mean visualize. There's data sets, there's maps, there's a whole history of cartography. The best thing on maps I've ever read is still Benedict Anderson's, the extra chapter that he added to Imagine Communities in the second edition in 1983. Chapter 6, Census Map Museum. Read it tonight. If you care. What is it up? What? Census Map Museum. No article, Census Map Museum. The publisher made him add it, and it's a much better book for that. But anyway, I think the difficulty is something that I've come to think of as really important to the question, not just something that a person who is trying to answer the question or whatever, live with the question, needs to work through. I think it's a difficulty not for completely triumphing over. It's not a difficulty for conquering. What makes place hard to see is the question that I end up with. And I'm working on Noah Purifoy now, and I'm working on the late Purifoy, who's in the desert from 1989 to the end of his life. And talk about a place that's hard to see. It's different every day. It's meant to be. There's less of it every time. It's meant to be that way. There's no recovering it with any number of art historical or conceptual apparatuses, and it's meant to be irrecoverable in those ways. It was made to be hard to see. Even though you can go and it's just 11 acres, it's not hard to see 11 acres, but the thing itself is very difficult to see. Because a picture of the thing, I bring it to a lecture, by the time I get to the talk, I'm telling a lie about, like the picture is telling a lie. So that's more than I wanted to say, but I'm really glad you gave me an opportunity to say something about it. I met you earlier, but I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry. George. George has a question.
Sort of a question/comment. I mean, it's also, I'm just kind of riffing off of the comment about place and also like, about all these great shows that are going on. I remember like when this, a few months ago, I guess it was May, Asian AAPI Heritage Month, whatever, but I had friends from out of town. And actually, it was actually Yue Liu is a gallerist, and she had a great Korean-American artist who was visiting from Pennsylvania, and because you were showing her work. And she was here for like a few days, and I said, you got to go check out, this ICA show. You got to go check out the Japanese American National Museum with the giant robot show. You got to check out, Vincent Price Art Museum. You got to check, all this stuff that's going on, like API stuff. I had like at the Hammer, the whole list. And so she was like overwhelmed, and she did check out these shows. Now she wants to come to LA, and it's sort of like, why are all the, I think there is a common denominator. I don't know. There's like almost like I'm going to be saluting the California flag or something. But like, we've created something here in Southern California. We've, and through like years of activism and fighting institutions and organizing and just hanging out, like, Guadalupe over there, has been documenting the party scene in LA for a long time and basically highlighting not just that it was some like, illegal activity, but it was like, this is community organizing, right? And that's what we're doing here. So, as far as that, when that comment was made to you, Shizu, about like, oh yeah, you're go in a community center. I know that was a passive-aggressive dig at you. I know it was, right? But the flip side of that is, my task, our task, I feel, is to transform every one of these institutions into our community center, right? Because I've been at ICA now like multiple times since the show's been up, right? Because I feel like it's my community center. And I invite I probably invited like 30 people to come see this show. And the same thing with Deitch, and the same thing with all these spaces. So we just gotta keep on doing what we're doing, because it's like, there is, we're artists, we're arts activists, but we're also like fighting for our communities. This is what people were doing, ASCA was doing back in the day. That's what, and there's a legacy of that, and it's not built on nothing, and we're making it happen, and we should take a moment to congratulate ourselves. I mean, I think maybe, next year we'll be like, in the hills of Santa Monica fighting as partisans against, some authoritarian army or whatever. But hey, at least we know each other now, right? So these are good things. So anyway, I think there is something specific about the place, which is Southern California. There's something happening here, like, think of where we were in the riots in '92. That was like the bottom, right? And then, it's not a good place, it's not perfect. There's a lot of screwed up shit going on. Housing is too expensive, all sorts of stuff. But like, we can't take away a few things in that, when people from out of town can come, we can say, look, you go see this artist doing this, all this sort of stuff, and it's happening. So anyway, that's my positive note for the evening. So.
I just got the wrap-up sign, so I'd like to thank everyone up on the table.
Thank you so
and
much.
Everyone in the group here, and thank Aska, and Anne, and Anna, and everyone. Thank you so much.